A cold palace hall. The year is 1392. In the middle of it stands the powerful King of France, Charles VI. But he is not on his throne. He is cowering in a corner, dressed in clothing reinforced with iron rods. In his eyes is pure terror. He whispers a single phrase, "Don't touch me, I'll shatter." This isn't a scene from a movie. It's a real affliction known as the glass delusion. And the King of France wasn't the only ruler whose madness had to be hidden from the world. The glass delusion was a known, albeit rare, malady among the aristocracy of the late Middle Ages, a kind of affliction of the rich and melancholic. This makes Charles's story even stranger. His madness was almost fashionable. Today, we won't just list the strange habits of kings. We will dissect the system. We will show how entire nations functioned when their leader lost touch with reality. We'll explore the ingenious and horrifying methods used to maintain a theater of normalcy and what happened when that theater collapsed. Imagine a pilot losing their mind mid-flight. The crew must not only secretly seize control, but also convince 300 passengers that everything is going according to plan. For centuries, royal courts did exactly this, but on the scale of entire nations. You will learn why one emperor declared war on the sea and made his horse a senator. How courtiers ran a country for years in the name of a sleeping monarch, and most importantly, how to recognize the warning signs that are still relevant today. These stories are not just historical anecdotes. They are extreme case studies in the psychology of power, now studied in business schools and military academies like West Point. To understand the limits of the human mind under the pressure of absolute power, take Charles VI. Before becoming the Glass Man, he was Charles the Beloved, a young, energetic, and popular ruler loved by his people. But everything changed on a sweltering August day in 1392 in a forest near Le Mans. A ragged man ran out of the thicket and shouted, "King, you are betrayed." For Charles, this was the trigger. He drew his sword and attacked his own entourage, killing several knights before he could be disarmed and restrained. This wasn't just fear. It was an absolute physical certainty of his own fragility. Imagine living with the feeling that your bones are made of bohemian crystal. Every touch, every embrace threatens to shatter you into 1,000 pieces. For months, Charles wouldn't change his clothes, fearing they would grind his body to dust. The tragedy was compounded by his periods of lucidity. He would become aware of his condition, weep, and beg for forgiveness in terror, making his subsequent relapses all the more agonizing for everyone. The entire Louvre was transformed into a giant, velvet and gold-lined asylum. Soft cushions were placed everywhere. Sudden movements were forbidden. Servants moved like shadows. It was a theater of the absurd where the greatest aristocrats of France learned to walk on tiptoe and speak in whispers lest they break their king. For a moment, put yourself in the shoes of his advisor. The king issues an order, but you know he is mad. To obey it is to harm the country. To disobey it is to commit treason. There is no right answer. This isn't a theoretical problem. This was the exact situation faced by the Dukes of Burgundy and Orleans. They waged a bitter struggle for the regency, where every decision was not just a choice, but a move in a deadly political game, using the king's madness as a weapon against each other. Chaos breeds chaos. On January 28, 1393, the court held the Ball of the Burning Men in an attempt to cheer the monarch. Several courtiers dressed as wild men in costumes of linen soaked in resin and covered in feathers. They became walking torches when the king's brother brought a flame too close. They burned alive before the entire court. Charles himself miraculously survived when the Duchess of Berry, thinking quickly, covered him with her voluminous dress and extinguished the flames. This horror only plunged him deeper into madness. But the fear of shattering is one thing. What if a ruler doesn't see himself as fragile, but as a god? That madness is far more dangerous. We now move from a power vacuum to a power black hole, one that sucks in all morality, logic, and reality itself. The Roman Emperor Caligula asked himself a simple question. If I can execute anyone, seize any property, and no one can stop me, how am I different from a god? He found no answer. Modern psychologists call this hubris syndrome. Neurologist and politician David Owen, who studied it, concluded that absolute power acts on the brain like a potent drug, destroying empathy and critical thinking. Caligula had a fatal overdose. His madness wasn't chaotic, it was performative. When he appointed his horse, Incitatus, as consul, it wasn't the rambling of a madman, it was spitting in the face of the entire Roman aristocracy. He was showing them that his horse was worth more than the whole Senate. When he ordered his legions to attack the sea and collect seashells as trophies, it was a declaration of victory over nature itself. But there's a detail. Some historians believe this was a mistranslation. The Latin word musculi can mean both seashells and small military huts. Perhaps Caligula simply ordered his soldiers in a humiliating fashion to dismantle their own camp. The question remains, what is worse, the order of a madman or the sophisticated mockery of a genius of humiliation? Here we run into a problem. The main sources on Caligula, Suetonius and Cassius Dio, wrote decades after his death. Reading them is like reading an autopsy report written by the murderers. Their goal was not to diagnose, but to justify the verdict. The truth is likely somewhere in between, which makes it even more unsettling. But a god complex takes many forms. Let's jump forward 1,500 years to Muscovy. Ivan the Terrible also saw himself as an instrument of God, but his madness was fueled not by hedonism, but by paranoia and religious fanaticism. His oprichniki wore black. They tied dogs' heads and brooms to their saddles, symbols of sniffing out and sweeping away treason. Ivan himself could prostrate himself for hours in church, then personally descend into the dungeons to participate in torture. For him, mass murder was a form of prayer. Cruelty was proof of faith. In a fit of rage, he killed his own son and heir. But surely something like that is impossible to hide. Or is it? It's one thing to have a monster on the throne. It's quite another to build an elaborate machine to convince the world that he is a saint. Let's look at the blueprints for this. Machine of concealment. The primary tool of this machine is isolation. When King George III of England began to lose his sanity, he wasn't locked in a tower. He was simply taken away to the remote Kew Palace. The official story for the public: the king is resting, he has a cold or gout. Modern researchers believe George suffered from either porphyria or bipolar disorder. His physical removal allowed the system to function without him. This is the royal version of rebooting a broken device. You can't fix it, so you just disconnect it from the network to allow the system to work around it. But what if the monarch can't be hidden? Then he is turned into a puppet. He is brought out for ceremonies, sits in silence, while a power behind the throne or a council makes all the decisions. The perfect example is Austrian Emperor Ferdinand I, who was mentally deficient. Chancellor Metternich ruled in his stead. Ferdinand's famous quote when he was denied out-of-season apricot dumplings says it all. "I am the emperor, and I want dumplings." The monarch becomes a living flag. He doesn't need to think, he just needs to be. Look at this through the eyes of a court physician. You are treating the most powerful man in the world who doesn't believe he is sick. He might consider any medicine poison, and you, a traitor. Dr. Francis Willis and his sons treated George III with methods of moral management, which included straitjackets, gags, and being strapped to a chair. They sincerely believed that by breaking the king's will, they could heal his mind. You are simultaneously a doctor, a jailer, and a potential scapegoat. The most ingenious method is not to fight the madness, but to integrate it into palace etiquette. It's like a bug in a video game that the developers declare a feature. The madness becomes the new rule of the game. If the king believes he is a bird, a golden cage is built for him and called a new pavilion. If he talks to imaginary people, courtiers bow to empty space. When Juana Wars of Castile, nicknamed the Mad, traveled for years with the coffin of her dead husband, the court was forced to interpret this not as necrophilia, but as an act of supreme piety. A clever advisor to a mad king works like a lightning rod. He doesn't try to stop the storm of paranoia. He directs its strike into a safe or even advantageous channel, whether it's an unsuspecting noble family or a neighboring state. This way, the ruler's bloodlust is sated and the nation is united against a common threat. But a theatrical set, no matter how lavish, remains cardboard and paint, and a single gust of reality's wind can blow it all down. That gust of wind had a name, Agincourt. While France tiptoed around its glass king, the English were marching across its land. The power vacuum in Paris was an invitation to them. The price of Charles's madness was national humiliation. This culminated in the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. In it, Charles VI, a puppet in the hands of his court, disinherited his own son, the Dauphin Charles. He declared King Henry V of England his heir. The mad king literally gave his kingdom to the enemy. For Ivan the Terrible, the set collapsed after his death. A system built on fear is not viable without its creator. By killing his heir, Ivan the Terrible left the throne to his feeble-minded son, Fyodor. After Fyodor's death, the Rurik dynasty ended. The country plunged into the chaos of the time of troubles. This gave rise to the phenomenon of impostors, the false Dimitris, who seized the throne, proving that the center of power had been completely destroyed. Sometimes, the system doesn't wait. It tears down the set itself. Tired of the humiliation, Caligula's Praetorian Guard decided to amputate the problem. The conspiracy was led by the praetor Cassius Chaerea, whom Caligula constantly humiliated by mocking his high-pitched voice. The emperor was stabbed to death in an underground corridor of a theater, sustaining more than 30 wounds. Immediately after, his wife was killed, and his 1-year-old daughter's head was smashed against a wall. The system didn't just remove the tumor. It cauterized it with a white-hot iron. These stories are separated by centuries, but they share common patterns. As Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The rhymes of a power's collapse sound frighteningly similar in any era. So let's learn these verses. Here are those verses. This isn't just historical analysis, it's a diagnostic toolkit for assessing the health of any system of power, from a monarchy to a modern corporation. So how do you recognize that the system is sick? Here are 3 key symptoms that have repeated throughout history. First, the leader stops receiving bad news. He surrounds himself only with yes-men. This creates an information cocoon. The first casualty of absolute power is the truth. This mechanism led to the downfall not only of empires, but also of giants like the Enron Corporation. Second, any failure or criticism is explained not by mistakes, but by the schemes of enemies and conspiracies. Paranoia becomes state policy. The system stops using a compass and starts using a divining rod to find witches. Every problem is the result of malicious intent, not circumstance or incompetence. Third, maintaining an external image and performing rituals become more important than solving real problems. The theater completely replaces reality. The entire system turns into one large Potemkin village. The state's dashboard shows all systems are normal, while the engine is already on fire. And finally, the ultimate question. What do you think is truly more terrifying for a country? An obviously madman on the throne like Caligula, whose actions are visible to all? Or a perfectly functioning theater of normalcy that for years conceals the fact that the throne is actually empty? Write just one word in the comments, tyrant or facade. Let's see what we fear more. And consider this, a tyrant can be overthrown. But how do you overthrow a system that has no head, only a flawless imitation of one?